Hey everyone, and welcome to a new Crash Team Racing video. It's been quite a long time since I published a ranking video about the legendary skins. This one did ask a lot of work, so I had to put my other ideas on hold. But here's a video in which I will be ranking all of the karts of the game by my preference. Before I start, here are some rules. First, I will only be counting the karts that can be obtained by playing the game. This means the base game and Grand Prix kart will be in, as well as the champion kart, but no Firehawk, Cove Cruiser and Xfinity will be found on the list. Second, when I will talk about the appearance of the kart, I will always be considering the base paint set only. Third, when it comes to returning karts from Crash Nitro Kart and Crash Tag Team Racing, I will be considering the decals from the original game as part of its base design. 4. Speaking of returning karts, I will try my best to not let a nostalgia bias happen, but I don't know if I will be perfect on that front. And lastly, all of the statements are of course my opinion. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine, and I'm open to listening to opposite opinions as long as they're polite. And now that it's settled, let's get started. As my least favorite kart of the game, I'm declaring it to be the Neon Hawk, being the only kart that I can say I dislike. I'm already not fond of some of the more flashy paint jobs like Atomic, Ghost and especially Neon in long sessions, so seeing something flashy applied to a vehicle no matter what makes this ranking a given. I do consider it to be a big eyesore, as well as being released when we had a lot of flying vehicles available already. When it comes to decals, they're fine, but I can't really talk about them because of how little I use this kart. Second to last is the Nuke from the Wasteland Grand Prix. I've never been too fond of this kart, even if I do understand the appeal. I just don't find much reason to use it. None of the kart's decals use the decal color, which is kind of a shame as it restricts the visual variety. I don't have anything against the graffiti paint aesthetic, and none of the decals are bad, but all of them really change depending on the paint set, which I do consider a problem. Next up, we got the Dusty Rider. It comes from the Wasteland Grand Prix and ends up low on the ranking for pretty much the same reasons. The aesthetic is fine, but not to my taste, and none of the decals change depending on your paint set. So I rarely ever use this kart outside of very specific circumstances. Then we got the Desert Duster, which I do not dislike. I do consider it better than the previous two, because it is the only one from the Wasteland Grand Prix to use the decal color, despite the graffiti aesthetic for most of them. But in the end, I just prefer most hovercrafts over this one. Does it show that the Wasteland Grand Prix content didn't really interest me much? Coming next is a Nasty Ride. Now, the vehicle looks pretty good, especially with the crystals on the back. It's decently nice looking and has fine decals, but I don't find it myself using it much. It doesn't help that, in my eyes, Gnastic Nuke is the most forgettable character on the roster, next to Hunter. After that, we got the Daredevil in the Sega's Grand Prix. Once again, I don't dislike this kart, but I don't really have much to say here, given how little I use it. I find it odd in how small it is. The decals are all solid, and I do like how they use a different shade than most karts, as it makes it stand out from most decal selections. Not sure why the white paint isn't white for decals, but oh well. Then we got the Cog, a Binox team kart. I do have a lot of respect for the amazing work that they did on this game, but sadly, this vehicle is near the bottom of my preferences. It is neat, but it also got the bad luck of being released after a feeling of too many hovering vehicles being added. It does have some good decal choices, the Flying Donut one being a fairly funny one. A bit of a controversial take next, but the Candy Cone is a card that I don't have issues with. I'm not a big fan of it, and it apparently creeps some players out, but I do find it to be creative, and it fits the theme of the Winter Festival Grand Prix, while the other two cards from that Grand Prix were more on the generic winter theme. It's probably the funniest card to customize with paints to me. The decals are more or less a usual deal, and they're all fine. From the Back End Time Grand Prix, we got the Mammoth. I do like this card, it has a lot of details and quite creative and fitting to the Grand Prix. It's apparently based on an art from a cancelled racing game, but I most of the time prefer simplicity in the design, so I have to rank it a bit on the lower end of the list. The decals are nice, mostly on the tusks, and they're surprisingly well stylized compared to most. The Nitro Bumper is a card that I used to not care much about, but I was surprised to see it grow on me. I do like the idea of a bumper kart being a ride in a chaotic kart racer, and it does fit the baby racers as well. The decals are all fine, and the legendary one, like for the Daredevil, uses a set of shades unlike most decals. For the first time in this ranking, we get a returning kart, and I gotta give the lowest point to the Pressurizer. Out of Von Clutch's 3 vehicles from Tag Team, this one is probably the one I would have been the least thrilled to see come back. But while I would have rather preferred to see the Dirt Pickle making a return, I can definitely appreciate that they took a vehicle that I thought wasn't anything special and turned it into something a lot more detailed and crazy looking. I know that it's not a kart meant to reflect Von Clutch anymore, but between the color scheme and his chaotic personality, it's a great fit. As for the decals, they were all okay. Not much of a fan of the Neon Clown one, but it does fit the event it was released for. For the first of the 2 vehicles that have 3 wheels, we have the Dragonfly. I don't really use this card much if I have to be honest. It mainly got that position in the ranking thanks to being a Skylanders reference by being Archean themed. The decals are interestingly stylized in swirls, which is neat, but I don't really use this card enough to have a preference. The Champion card comes next, which is one I'm a bit mixed about. It was a huge deal back in the Grand Prix, and I think it's a good looking card, even if a little odd because it's more on the realistic side. My problem with it comes with the decal selection, as it is most valuable if you manage to rank in the top 5% of each Grand Prix. But without Grand Prix, it only gets 3 decals, one of which is given thanks to a glitch. On top of that, it only ever had legendary decals, and this card as a whole does a terrible job at showcasing the paint set outside of the main color. But still, it's a cool looking ride. Following that is the Skull Rider, a returning card from Tag Team. I mostly consider this to be a simpler version of the Mammoth because of the prehistoric vibe these 2 cards bring. So it's a bit weird how they brought back this one after making the Mammoth, but I welcome the variety. Anyway, I do prefer this one's design, with the concept of a skull actually being fitting to the spooky Grand Prix, and the lights on the eye sockets were a nice addition. When it comes to decals, a standout for me is a heavy metal one, being both a silly idea and a fitting one for the spooky team. For another returning card from Tag Team, we got the Imperium. It is a funny looking card that's based on a fairly simple premise for a vehicle, and one I see myself using quite a bit. It is fairly iconic for being one of the 2 starting vehicles from Tag Team Racing. It's unfortunately on the lower end because of how many options are better in my eyes. When it comes to decals, Fiery Flash and Comic Arts are interesting ones, but the standout outside of the base racer decal is the Full of Mud one that perfectly goes with what the card is. With a similar situation, the Trykey is next. It is simply based on a Jeep and it's a cool idea. But much like the previous entry, too many options lead to it being a little behind. When it comes to decals, it has a very good selection, with the Makov Hunters, Giraffe Spot and Camouflage fitting just as much as the original Tiger Stripes one. Now we have the Nautilus. This is a card from a spooky Grand Prix that I wasn't familiar with, as it was exclusive to the PSP version of Tag Team. And even after looking at it in the original, I couldn't tell what it was meant to be. Binox did a great job with the fisherman theme of this one, which made it go to a confusing card to a neat looking one in my eyes. The bendy fish in the back is a very cute detail too, and all of the decals are good and perfectly fit the card. The Galactic Cruiser, a card that was released with the Gasmuxia Grand Prix. It is a nice looking hovercraft, but unfortunately the other 2 options of the Grand Prix really did overshadow it. A bit ironic, since I did consider myself on the Toxic Burger side of the event, and it's the one with the Toxic Burger decal. Anyway, interestingly, this card is built to have a secondary color at the center, which is a nice change. As for the decals, they're fine. Not really paying attention to the Space Pirate one, but the anti-grav cab is my favorite. The Nitro Slag, a vehicle that has a similar history as the Nitro Bumper for me, which is funny considering that they have the same basis for the name. So this means I was overlooking it until it grew on me by its visual appeal. Yes, it is a hovering vehicle, which I had grown a little annoyance at that prominence, but it still grew on me by its winter theme. The decals are also nice, and the legendary one is both fitting to the theme of the Winter Festival, but also dependent of the paint set used. And then, a card that I really like, but it's very situational, it's the Spyro Mobile. It's an awesome looking card, but my problem is, I can barely ever see myself giving it to anyone else than Spyro. The decals are all fire. Nuggets, dragon stripes, scales and horns, the last one being my personal favorite, and a fire for the legendary one. So I do like it a lot, but I can't rank it much higher because I only ever use it while racing as Spyro. And now that we're near the halfway point, we get a card that I'm surprised got this position. It's the Nostalginator. This card got quite a fair amount of backlash when it was revealed, taking a tag team racing vehicle and giving it a kiddie-like appearance that isn't most people's favorite. I think I don't have that issue because I can kinda see why they changed it, to make it more unique compared to other returning cards from that game, and also it was released in the Back in Time Grand Prix with Baby Crash and Baby Coco, and I think it was meant to fit them. Both the card and its decals follow the baby theme pretty well, which makes it a nice one to me. It has the problem of being situational on a driver, like the Spyro Mobile, but this one gets the edge over it because there are more drivers than I can see myself giving this card to. Starting the higher side of the ranking, we get the Trykey. I don't really have much to say about it. It's a neat looking three-wheeler card with a simple and sleek design, and it is quite iconic for being one of the two starting cards in most versions of tag team racing. It was given decals for the first time, and they're decent, the checkered line and equalizer ones being pretty good to me. The Cabrio is a vehicle that was originally a test asset for tag team racing, and it makes its first official appearance here. I do like the simple design and the base color scheme that it brings, but I don't have much else to say because of how basic it is. But basic doesn't always mean bad. When it comes to alternate decals, the Road Trip one is pretty neat and the paint splashes is a good use of shading. The Snowplower is the last vehicle of the Winter Festival. Once again, we get a fairly simple idea for a vehicle that's turned into a cart, and sometimes it's all that you need. Its decals are all neat and in the winter theme, and they're all dependent on the paint set chosen. The Phantom is a card that Binox made by reimagining one of Nina's vehicles from tag team racing, and they certainly did a great job with it. The vehicle is fairly big, which is something that I did criticize on some of the previous entries, but there is something about the way it's shaped that makes it good to me. As for the decals, they are great at fitting the Spooky Grand Prix, with the Horror Symphony and the Spooky Choir being fitting to what the card is, and the others do fit the spooky theme. The Six Pipes is once again a simple design that works. It makes for a double origin, appearing in the PSP version of Crash Tag Team Racing as the equivalent of the Trykey, and being similar to the decals used by the lab assistants in Warped. When it comes to other decals, the bottom line is the basic one, but the bling bling one is a neat substitute to the flame ones. Interestingly, the last two decals seem to have gone for a spooky theme for some reason. Lucho is a very notable card because it's the first card that you see when you boot up Crash Tag Team Racing. I do really like the base combination of colors too, and it's pretty cool that they wasted no time bringing it back in the Nitro tour. When it comes to alternate decals, Pinnacle and Split Waves are pretty good to me. The Panty Buggy, while it isn't anything too special in the design, is a card that looks good for me and works well with most characters, despite the name suggesting a preference for Bandicoots. While at the same time, it was a Coco vehicle and tag team and was released in the Nitro tour alongside the 5 Bandicoot girls, so that makes sense. It's apparently somewhat based on a desert buggy, so it also makes sense that it was brought back alongside Twilight Tour's introduction. As for decals, I have the odd feeling watching them that space was somewhat limited, but I do like the twin Benz one. Detonator is most likely the most fancy card of the game. This card is possibly one of the most well known from tag team racing, but it was unavailable for PSP users, despite how I remember it to be prominent in advertisement of the game. I do like the base design with the flames, and the other decal options are also pretty good, with the taxi and the Trooper themed ones being pretty great. And for the first Nitro card vehicle, we have Team Cortex. It used to be based on an ATV, but it had to be redesigned with a steering wheel, so it lost some of its uniqueness, but it still stands out compared to most of the selection. For that reason alone, I feel like it wouldn't make it justice to put it lower. When it comes to decals, unfortunately, while none of them are bad, the space is very limited. Enough so that you wouldn't really notice that some of them affect the space around the light. Just above that one, we have Team Trends. It is a very basic looking kart and it's mostly here by a mix of nostalgia and being directly related to N-Trends. But I also like the alien-y vibe it gives. Unfortunately, it lost part of its charm by getting a steering wheel in this game, but it can be helped. The decals are the spots and flower ones are fairly weak choices, but not bad ones. I wonder if the spots are a reference to a Yoshi egg somewhat. The evening shade can look pretty good depending on your paint set, and the two high-tech ones can be good complements to its designs, but they aren't exactly my favorites. For another simple design, the Doom Buggy is next on the list. Out of all three of the engine vehicles from Tag Team Racing, I'm really not surprised that this is the one that was brought back, since it was the easiest to adapt, but also because it's quite likely the most popular one. Interestingly, it got some C-Team decals when I've always seen it as more of a space buggy, which it in fact has a space team decal. Continuing the trend of simple designs, we get the Hovercraft. This is one of the most basic designs in the game, but it's worth contextualizing that this kart, alongside Oxide himself, was a previously unobtainable thing in the original. So seeing it make a return legally playable and with anyone was one of the most hyped things about Nitro-Fueled pre-launch. So because of that, I don't think it'd be a problem to rank it at this spot. As for decals, the semicircles, flame and spark ones are standout to me. Opening up the single digits, we have the Probulus 2000, the only hovering vehicle from Crash Tag Team Racing. There's something about this kart's mix of vibes, from Mad Scientist Ride to Time Machine, that makes it pretty good. The only thing I don't like about it is the base color palette. I really do not like the combination of a pretty gritty shade of blue and bright light purple, so I usually switch paint set to use it for decals. Speaking of which, the side stripes and future highway are both pretty good in my eyes. And the use of Pitfall is a bit of a random fourth wall choice, but it fits the time-traveling theme of the Back in Time Grand Prix. Our next vehicle is from the second half of the racers from Nitro Kart, and it goes to the Team Bandicoot kart. The design is appealing and is definitely the most iconic of the original games when it comes to the playable racers. For the decals, the tree lines are an interesting alternative with nice shading, and the airbrush is pretty good looking depending on the paint set, but ironically not really with white decals for me. It also has two very good legendary decals. But despite this, I had to put it behind the Team Oxide kart. There's just something about the general design that makes it more cool looking and more fitting to a space adventure that Nitro Kart had. As for the decals, the Tricolor and Fast Lane are very good alternatives, and the rest, while not my favorite, are also all pretty good. And making it near the top of the list, it's the classic kart. Why? Because it's a classic kart. Okay, but seriously and nostalgia aside, there's something about the sheer simplicity of its design that somehow makes it appealing and great to use with any character. I do find it similar to the pipe frame from Mario Kart, because there is a big appeal in the retro feeling even if you didn't play the original games. Unfortunately, it gets a fairly limited decal design because of how little space there is, but none of them are bad. For our final Nitro Kart vehicle, we get the Little Chopper. This kart has identical circumstances as the Hovercraft, being a kart that a previous racing game let you see, but only through characters that you couldn't race as. Well, except on the GBA version, so more accurately, this game is its first playable appearance with a 3D model and a purple color. Much like the Hovercraft, the possibility to race inside this car was one of the most hyped things about Nitro-Fueled, and while, alongside Fake Video, it took a very long time to be included in the game, this awesome looking kart was definitely worth the wait. The decals, unfortunately, I'm not a fan, but the kart is just so good looking at base that it barely matters. On the final stretch of the list, we get the Nitro GT. This kart was included in the last batch of content that the game received, and it was quite surprising. In a similar fashion to the classic kart, something about the simple and clean go-kart design makes it very appealing and able to work with any character. It also helped a little in my case that it reminds me of the standard kart for Mario Kart Wii. The Formula N and Nitro Edge are awesome decals to me, and the others are also pretty good. Unfortunately, I'm not too crazy about the text on the wheels, so I usually use other ones, but that's the only thing I have against its base design. The bronze medal goes to my favorite hovercraft of the game, the Void Manta. Even though it was at a point where I started to get very tired of hovering vehicle, this kart was a pleasant surprise by having a design that I could describe as Classic Kart Hovering Edition, thanks to how simple it is and how I have the feeling that it fits any character. The fact that it looks like the vehicles that were used in some of the Crash Bash minigames also helps it to get that description. To me, the Void Runner is the best decal for it, but the Hyperdrive is great too. The others, unfortunately, I don't like them much, but the first two make up for it. The silver medal goes to the Rocket, the very first kart of the game that Binox didn't base on an existing Crash game. I didn't think much of it at release because I was really focused on the returning karts from Tag Team Racing, but it definitely grew on me, once again thanks to the simple design that makes it work with any character. For decals, the checkerboard is my favorite, with the classic stripes and fire spin being nice too. And the gold medal goes to the Roadster. This is a vehicle that was exclusive to the PSP version of Tag Team Racing, but this is one I couldn't use because of its exclusivity, despite its presence in the game's introduction. So it was very exciting for me to see it being brought back. I don't have the exact reason why I like it so much, so I'd say it's a combination of everything. The kart looking like a sports car with a slick aesthetic, the overall shape, the star on the base decal and the regular color scheme. As for decals, while the Lone Star remains my favorite, I do like the two tones, and the Sunset Legendary one looks pretty good as well. And there we go, my ranking on the cards of Nitro-Fueled. This was a lot easier to do than the Legendary Skin rankings, given how much shorter it is. So maybe it would have been wiser to do this one first, but oh well. If you've reached this far, thanks a lot for watching. If you have different opinions than mine, once again, it's perfectly fine and I'm open to listening to them. And with that, take care!